thing that comes to mind for me is we all have the opportunity to impact how we lead, how we show up. And the fact that you're here today says a lot about who you are as an individual and as a leader. So first, I want to celebrate you in that space. But like Brianna said, I want this to be a safe space. It's not often where we get to come together as leaders from different industries, from hospitality, from higher ed to tech, and really learn from one another. So think of me here as your person to facilitate the conversation, but the knowledge that you have is already in you. And so it's just a matter of pulling it out, resurfacing it, exploring it, and really just showing up better each and every day. And today we're going to focus on leading at the speed of trust. Our time together, it's not about this mind-blowing new discovery. We've all heard of trust, we've all heard of leadership, but it's more so about reflecting, deepening our perspective on trust and how we can elevate our relationships. I'll have to say, we all have family, and I am based in Atlanta, so I'm a Southern kid. We all have family. We have the family that we cold-heartedly trust without a doubt. And then we have those family members that we trust, depending on the topic. And then we have those family members that we know we don't really trust at all. We love them, but we know we don't trust them. And each of those relationships we manage differently. We handle them differently. We respond, we connect, we share, and we engage with those family members just a little bit differently. The ones we don't trust, we often love from a distance. And the ones we trust unconditionally, we volunteer to be in their presence. And the reality is that same mental model, that same feeling, that same emotion, that translates right into the workforce. Whether you're a new leader or a 10-year leader, whatever your situation, maybe you're an inspiring leader, trust is critical to relationship building. And that's what we're going to dive into together. So the work of leadership is to drive trust, but to do it in a way that inspires trust, but also drives results. A lot of times we think of trust in one hand and we think of results in the other. They're separate. I got to get the job done, right? And then I got to build trust. These are separate things. But studies show that trust is what drives greater results, greater performance. And I think we've seen that in our personal lives, whether it's doing family events, or we've seen it in our professional lives. When we're on a team where we feel like we are trusted individuals, we can do better results. We can perform at a higher pace. So according to Steve Covey, for you all that are familiar with Leading at the Speed of Trust, that novel, there are 3 key areas of trust. The first one is self-trust. Individuals believe in their abilities, judgments, and integrity. It's a self-belief system here. The second is relationship trust, the trust that exists between individuals and teams. And then the third is organizational trust, confidence that employees have within their leadership and the values and the culture and in the overall collective organization. Now, the reality is we can dive into all 3 of these, but I think it's more important that we hyper-focus on one. And the chosen one for today is going to be focusing on relationship trust. And arguably, as a leader, that is probably the most challenging one. Because as human beings, we are the most complex part of the business. It's never the product, it's never the service we provide, it's the humans that we lead that are the most complex aspects of the business. So I want us to get our typing fingers ready. Go ahead and get those typing fingers and get them in the chat. And my question that I want us to share in the chat together is, how do you build trust in your professional relationships today? This doesn't have to be a rocket science answer. In its simplest form, in a word or a phrase, how do you build trust within your professional relationships today?
Oh, we have quite a bit of responses. Communication, listen, follow through. That's a good one, Joanna. My word is my bond. By doing what you say you will do, common purpose, dependability, open communication, being honest, consistency. So a lot of consistency in these things, communication and staying true to your word. And that's just exactly what I was going to say along the lines of building trust and relationships. I do that by just talking, just talking to my coworkers and colleagues and finding out what their work commute was like. I mean, that all of those things are how I build trust. Tony says, do what you say, follow through, not saying one thing to you, but another to someone else. Checking with others, emotional accountability, that's a good one. Transparency.
Yeah, these are so good. So this just got me really, really excited for two reasons. One, I love the amount of wealth of knowledge around trust that's already in the room. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I'm hearing time and time again are skills that take time to acquire. Building strong levels of communication, being congruent with what you say and what you do. Open communication, designing those methods, those take time. And so again, as we think through building relationship trust, there's things that you're already good at. And we want to capitalize on those. But as we also dive into our time today, I want us to also think about where are the things that we're not as strong at and how can we make those areas of opportunity when it comes down to building trust a strength. So when I look in the chat, I'm going to tailor some of our conversation as we discuss a little bit more today about relationship trust. But you're absolutely right. When we're building strong teams, when we're building a place where we want to work, where we want other people to want to work, when we're building a leadership capability, it's all about how we foster relationships, the most challenging part of the workforce. And that all starts with trust. So I want to share 3 practices that I encourage you to consistently apply when you think about building trust. And I'll be totally transparent. Based off the chat, something's telling me that you're already applying many of these in some way, shape, or form. But I want us to think, how can we do it better? How can we do it more consistently? And how can we do it congruently? So the first one is empathy. Empathy is the foundation of building trust. And we oftentimes speak about empathy as it displays a common concern for team members, emotional health, their well-being. And that's totally true. But I think we can all agree to some way, shape, or form that over the last 3 or 4 years in the workspace, the term empathy has been tossed around quite a bit. I'll be totally transparent. I haven't heard the word empathy used in the workplace as much as I've heard it during the time of the pandemic, when we were all physically apart, dealing with a lot of emotional things and things of that nature. And to some degree, I would say empathy took on a connotation of just be nice, act like you care. I mean, act like they matter. And I think when we think of empathy, if we stop there of just acting the part of being empathetic, we lose people. And quite frankly, we lose ourselves as leaders. So it's how do we recenter ourselves? So I want to expand on our thought of empathy. I want us to not only think of empathy as understanding, but I want us to think of empathy as an invitation to lean in with more curiosity. Moving forward, when you hear empathy, whether it's in your workplace, your profession, your personal place, I want you to think of empathy and curiosity. I want those words to be almost synonyms for you. The best way we show empathy is by being curious. So yes, do I like you as a person? Sure I do. Let me get curious and understand what I actually like about you. That's where I show that I care. It's not just accepting it at face value. Here's a fairly normal scenario that I think we can all relate to in some way, shape, or form. Manager walks into the office and says, your numbers are down for the 3rd quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before, and if you don't pick up your numbers in the next quarter, I don't know what's going to happen to you. That's a detractor to trust. That's a detractor to a relationship. That's a detractor to trust. Now imagine we layer some empathy in there and we take that same scenario and we say, your numbers are down for the 3rd quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before. Are you okay? What's going on? I'm worried about you. Now, the reality is we're going to get to the same solution, but here's an opportunity for us to laser focus on the human versus the problem. Do you see in that second scenario when I showed empathy, I separated the person from the problem. I am not assuming the person that's not performing is the problem. The person is not the problem. It's just their execution or their output is an opportunity. So let me get to the core. How do I get to the core? I get curious. And when we get curious, that's when we build connection. That's when we have conversations that are oftentimes a little bit more uncomfortable. The conversations that are most uncomfortable are the conversations that bring us closer together. So my reflection question for you when we think of empathy, and this is something that I want you just to think about. How can I leverage curiosity to strengthen my relationships? Who on my team can I get more curious about to understand them a little bit more, to help them be better performers? Maybe it's your direct reports. Maybe it's your peer to your left and your right, or maybe it's upward management. Maybe it's someone that's more tenure, more senior than you, that you're like, man, I think we could work better together if we trusted each other more, but I'm not sure why we don't have that level of trust. Let's start with a little bit of curiosity. So with that being said, I want to talk about the second bullet. My favorite one of all, and that's consistency. Now, I'm going to be totally transparent here. The reality is we move a million miles per hour. It's no secret around that, regardless of your industry. There's no industry that's moving slow. Everyone's moving fast. I'm almost confident to say there's no department or no team on this call that's overstaffed, that has ample amount of resources. We all are working to do more with less. And a lot of times, when that is the case, consistency is something that we lack. We're moving a million miles per hour, so we're jumping in, we're jumping out, we're jumping here, we're jumping there. And we lack the critical element of consistency. In its simplest forms, consistency, that's defined as going at a steady length for a period of time. The opposite is intensity. And this is defined as going fast for a short period of time. And I think if we all take a moment and reflect, we can all say, yeah, I spend a lot more time being intense versus consistent. Why? Because there's so many demands, there's so many things on my plate. Studies show that intensity for long periods of time is a detractor to building a trusted relationship. When we are intense, we lack consistency, we're oftentimes very reactive, and we don't create a space for routine behavior. When we're consistent, we allow people to get in the groove and align with how we think, how we lead, how we show up. They can align with our thought process a lot closer. The more closer I can align with your thought process, the better we can connect, the more we can build trust. Here's an example. And this is a true example that I just experienced not too long ago. I have a leader who started this project, got the whole company backed up behind it. We are going to roll this out. It's going to change the way we do things. And it was so much excitement and intensity. And it felt good. But as the weeks went on, we were all looking around like, are we still doing the project? What's the status? Is anybody moving forward with this? What's happening here? And still to this day, I don't know what happened there. And that, not to anyone's fault, but as a leader, that's a detractor from trust. Because now I don't know what to expect. Am I working on the right thing? Are you going to come in tomorrow and you're going to change the project? Are you going to change the whole strategy tomorrow that I can't even keep up because we're just so intense, we're so responsive, but we're lacking consistency? The more we can be steady, the better we can build trust. One of my favorite examples I'll say is I'm now an uncle of a 2-year-old niece. So I'm excited for that. And one of the things that I'm learning as I look at my sister and my brother-in-law is they are building consistent behaviors. In the morning, we do this. In the evening, we do this. Then when my niece goes to daycare, I look at her agenda, and every day from 8 to 5, it's so well structured. Now, I get it. Our worlds aren't that structured and that plucked, and I get that. But where can we provide a little bit more consistency in order to build a little bit more trust? So the reflection I have for you is, where can you add more consistency within your teams and within your day-to-day work? That's the reflection question there. Is it showing up prepared? Is it leading from the heart? Is it managing your biases? Is it having your consistent one-on-ones bi-weekly like you said you were going to do? Just something to think about. And then lastly, I'm excited to go to our third bullet that I want to share. So we talked about empathy. We talked about consistency. And for many of us, we're like, well, that sounds great, but I got to hit my numbers. I got to bring in funding. I got to make sure that I am hitting my metric so I can keep my job, so my team can show their value add to the business. You're absolutely right. Let's talk about results. Trust is a force that helps drive results. Do you remember that quote on the screen from the beginning of our time today? I said, the work of leadership is to drive results in a way that inspires trust. We're not holding trust and results in two separate hands. We're holding them together in one. We can get better results when we lead with trust. So for my new leaders, or people that are new to leadership, driving results starts off with really being credible. I report, and I'm going to use this as an example, I report into Pam. Pam, I'm reporting to you, and I am a direct reporting to you, and I am hoping that you're able to show me the way. I am hoping that you're able to help me do my job better. I am hoping that you're able to help me develop my soft skills better. My hope is that after I finish under your leadership, Pam, that I'm able to walk away and say, I'm a better person, a better professional for working with you. That's our responsibility as a leader. When we can create that space with trust, we get better results. We get more engagement. We get higher level of performance. We get people working on the right things, focusing to make a difference. If my responsibility is to hit $100,000 in funding for my nonprofit every month, I kid you not, I will do this so much better if my boss is consistent with how she shows up or how he shows up. I would do this so much better if my boss is leading with a human-centric approach. And what I mean by that is they're empathetic, not because they care about the result, but because they care about me. And because they care about me, I care about the results. When we jump straight to results and we hold results in one hand and we hold trust in another, that is a detractor. And for many of us, we might be saying, that's me. That's okay. It's many of us. And that's the part of this awesome opportunity to come together and really say, how do we expand on how we build trust? The reality is the moment we start putting trust and results together, that is when we win impeccably. That's when we win long-term. And that's when we start seeing things like turnover decreasing. That's when we start seeing engagement increasing. That's when we start seeing creativity maximizing. So the three elements: building trust, empathy, consistency, and results. How can you be more accountable for driving results through trust? That's the reflection question there. So I want to check the chat just to make sure I'm not missing anything, any questions, comments, or thoughts. All right.
Hey, we are just in awe, Jason. You have dropped some good gems so far with the empathy, consistency, and results. So we are all leaning in with our curiosity. So please feel free to continue.
Awesome. So we talked about empathy, we talked about consistency, and we talked about results. And for many of us, myself included, I need some type of analogy to be able to digest. Once I close this computer, once I sign out of this training, how does this actually look with my direct reports? Whether they're high performers, whether they're low performers, how does this actually look? So I want us to explore the bank of trust. Now, one thing I know we're all knowledgeable on is the bank. Now, the question is, how knowledgeable are we on the bank of trust? Let's talk. The bank of trust basically is saying, every time we do something as a leader, as a peer, as an employee, as a partner, we do one of two things. We either deposit into the trust account or we withdraw. Every person that you come in contact with, whether it's for 1 minute or 30 minutes, or for multiple years, you automatically sign up for a trust account. It's not an option. You automatically sign up for a trust account. And from that moment, you either start depositing, you start withdrawing, and sometimes a mixture of both. The reality here is when we think of deposits, this is when we're showing up through our verbals, our nonverbals, our heart, our interaction. And we are saying, hey, we're doing these behaviors because I want to build a trusting relationship. I'm leaning in with curiosity, deposit. I'm being congruent, saying what I mean what I'm saying, deposit. I saw in the chat earlier, I'm being transparent. I'm leaning in with open communication, deposit. And then we have moments where we're withdrawing. And we all have withdrawal, even the best leaders. And those withdrawals can sometimes be, hey, the last month I didn't show up congruently. I was dealing with some personal things. Or maybe I did give some false information. Wasn't my intent because I thought it was accurate, but I realized that it wasn't accurate. So even though I corrected myself, that still could be a withdrawal. Or one of the most popular ones I would say when it comes down to the withdrawal is, oh man, I gave you and led you to a promise that I can't fulfill. Where I've seen this most is, yeah, I kid you not, if you keep working, we're going to get you promoted. Well, we all know that we are not the single solution or single point of contact for promotions. We influence it, but we are not the decision maker behind that. So when we make some promises out of good intent, it can oftentimes be a withdrawal if it's something that we can't deliver on or we can't back up. Kind of like results, we lose our credibility. Withdrawal does not strengthen the relationship. And the reality is what really sucks the most, just using real layman terms here, what really sucks is when we have a withdrawal, it takes so many more deposits to make up for that. And some withdrawals we can't make up from. I would like to think that those are far in between with us on this call today, but we all know there's some things that have happened maybe to us as leaders during our time and during our tenure where we're like, oh man, that's a deal breaker for me. And just to go back to talking about family, I love this analogy so much for family because I think of my large family that I have and I think of, man, when my grandmother did this, that was such a deposit. She showed me that she cared. She leaned in with curiosity. But then when my uncle did this, oh, that was such a withdrawal. And every person that I have in my family, in my personal life, my professional life, we have trust accounts. So the question I have for you is I want you to think about your team. Think about the people you work with most closely. How often are you depositing? How often are you withdrawing? Is the account in the red? And if so, don't be hard on yourself. This is a moment for us to reflect and say, I didn't realize this account was in the red. And then to take it just a little bit step further. When I first was exploring this topic of trust, my thought was, well, I think my trust level and my deposit with Brianna, I think we only have deposits. I don't think we have any withdrawals. But then maybe someone asks Brianna, and Brianna's like, well, no, we have some withdrawals. And I don't even know about it. One of the real things that happen in the workforce is that you say the account is at $1 million, but the person that's also a shared account with you in that relationship, they're saying, hey, we're in the red. So how do we get alignment on where we are in our accounts? You're probably wondering, that's impossible to know. It's not. It's about open communication, transparency, and asking the questions. Now, maybe I probably wouldn't say, Pam, what's the budget at today? Where's your trust account at? You at 1,000 or 100,000? I probably wouldn't say it that way, but I might say, hey, Pam, do you feel like you can be yourself around me? Pam, do you feel like you can show up and truly just be authentic? And one of my favorites, Pam, if you are failing, would you tell me? If you are struggling, would you tell me? That is a simple sign of where a deposit is oftentimes. So don't think that you have to go in with this magic framework of knowing your trust account and getting all into the details. It's really about having a picture to understand that everyone is an account. Everyone has an account, whether you like it or not. And it's your responsibility to ensure that you are depositing into that account.
And I think you brought up something very valid here, Jason, when we're talking about the bank of trust, because earlier we mentioned, when you mentioned empathy, it's a lot. We hear the term act like you care. And when you're acting like you care, you're not really making deposits in that bank of trust. You're just acting. You're not getting to the root cause of the issue. You're not leaning in and being curious. And all when you're not doing those things, yeah, it's certainly a withdrawal. So I like this whole analogy of the bank of trust. And it just even further drives why we should go beyond acting like we care when it comes to empathy.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you shared that. And one thing that came to mind for me, we're actually going to talk about it in a second, but just got really excited for a moment. One thing that came to mind is when we act like we care, that lasts for a short period of time. One of the things that for you all that are familiar with Kim Scott, who's another well-renowned author that focuses in the leadership space, you can get results by acting. You can. There's no secret around it. We see it in politics. We see it maybe in our own workplaces. We even see it in some of our families and some of our relationships. But when you think of winning impeccably, and winning impeccably basically means I want to win for the long-term gain. That is where true, authentic empathy, curiosity, consistency, that is where those have to be present. Our turnovers will continue to happen from employees and even oftentimes customers. Because the reality is when we show empathy internally as an organization, our frontline employees, whether they're the sales, whether they're selling, whether they're nurses, whatever the case is, they show empathy to the customers. So it's a trickle-down effect. So I love that you called that out.
Yes, and just to say one more thing, we attended a recent conference back in May, and we went to a breakout session led by Scott Blanchard and his son, who's now the CEO. Well, Kim Blanchard and his son, Scott Blanchard, who's now the CEO. And they said your bottom line, the true bottom line is how you treat your people. So, like just think about that. So having trust and using trust to drive results, that's important because your bottom line is a true reflection on how you're treating your people.
Absolutely. And it shows, and not to geek out over data, but the companies that do it well internally, they see the results externally. And I think all of us, without me even sharing my own opinions, we all have brands that we're like, they treat their customers so well and their customers and they treat their employees so well and their employees treat their customers so well. I'm not going to even ask us to throw it in the chat because I know we can name a lot of companies in that space, but that's what we have to aim for. And I want to be very honest and transparent while we're talking about this. I'm going to derail just for a moment. Oftentimes we have those moments where we say, well, I want to do this and I want to show up like this leader, but the leader above me is not doing it. The executive team, they're not doing it. I want to just acknowledge this because this comes up in conferences time and times again. I want to acknowledge that your leadership ability and how you show up and how you lead from the heart has nothing to do with the people above you or under you, has everything to do with you. So I just want to just preference that. So a moment of reflection for all of us, because we've all been in those situations where we say, I'm a good leader, but it's hard for me to do these things when everyone else above me is not doing it. It makes me think of driving. It's really hard to go the speed limit when everyone else is speeding, but you can if you choose to. The choice is yours. So just keep that in mind as well. We're in full ownership of our locus of control of how we show up as leaders. So with that being said, when we think about the bank of trust, I want us to take a brief moment and I want us to just ask ourselves, how much are you depositing and how much are you withdrawing from your trust accounts? And if you're unsure, I challenge you as your action item for today, this week, and the upcoming weeks to figure it out by asking the questions. Do you feel like you're on a trusting team? And some of us might say, oh my goodness, we can't do this right now. My company is not in a position to ask questions like this. Throw an anonymous survey out there to your team. But if you are leading a team and you don't know where your team is as far as trusting your leadership, and maybe if you don't know where you are as far as trusting your team, well, high performance is not even in the equation. And when I say high performance, I mean high performance for long periods of time. So get those fingers ready for the chat. We're going to do an activity. I'm going to put something on the screen. It's going to be a character that's going to be located in a red dot. Without speaking, I want you just to go to the chat and I want you to write the first thing you see. First thing you see, write it in the chat. Ready, set, go.
6G, 9, stop. 6, 9, sideways 6G, unopened lock. 9, a lock.
Interesting. I'm intrigued. So the unopened lock, that's a good one. Haven't heard that one before. Red button sideways. 9, 6 is G's. Why is it that? A winking eye. I love that. Let's just get creative. Why won't we? I love that. We are all looking at the exact same thing. But what you're seeing, what I'm seeing, what Joanne is seeing, what Paula is seeing, what many of us on this call are seeing, Suzanne, are different slightly. And you're probably wondering, well, where are you going with this? Well, the reality is when we think of trust, what's a deposit to one person is not always a deposit to another. What's a withdrawal for one person is not always a withdrawal to another. So even though you said, hey, I gave you this, it's a 9, what do you mean you're seeing a 6? Welcome to leading people. We're such complex human beings. And the takeaway from this is to say, you have to have that level of open communication to ensure that if you're leaning in with trust and that's your intent, you have to be able to follow up and ensure that's the impact. A great example, and I learned this the hard way, I would always give people nicknames. I would say, Bree, Paul, Pam, and her name is Pamela. And I would give all these nicknames. And for me, that was a sign of endearment. That was my way of saying, you know what, we're building a connection. That to me is a trust deposit. But then I learned, well, my name is Brianna. Don't change it. Who gave you the power to change my name? That's a withdrawal for some people. I would not know that unless I ask and say, hey, Pamela, is it okay? Do you go by Pam? Is it okay if I call you Pam? And she says, no, please don't. You got it. The goal here is to ensure that everything that we do can have good intent, but if it doesn't land with the right impact, that's an opportunity for us to close the gap. This is where it gets tricky and where it gets a little bit more challenging. A withdrawal doesn't have to be a withdrawal. Withdrawals often takes place due to lack of communication after the event. What do I mean by that? If you drop the ball, because you're human too, if you drop the ball, it's okay to circle back and say, you know what, actually, I think I gave you some miscommunication. I know this makes work a little bit harder for you, so my apologies. Let me know how I can help, but this is the most accurate thing that I need to update you with. That goes from a withdrawal to ideally to a deposit because you're showing that you care by following up. But let's be real. Some people will still say it's a withdrawal. Let's just hope it's a withdrawal that might be -1,000 versus -1 million. Regardless, either way, we have to ensure that if we are wanting to build a trusting relationship, we are complex humans. Our intent does not always align to our impact. We perceive things differently. It's our responsibility to open a space of communication to have that dialogue. So with that being said, I am going to play a video from the famous Simon Sinek, and he spoke at this Atlanta Coca-Cola conference. And from the time I heard him speak on this topic, it really just resonated with me. And I think it'll resonate with each of you all as well. As he gives us his perspective on leading with trust, he uses some very simple examples. And as we think through this, I want us to think about our team, our partnerships that we have within our workspace, and think about how can I show up better? I'm going to play the video.
How do you build that trusting team? So I'll tell you a funny story. It's a true story that really captures what it means to be on a trusting team. I went on a business trip to Las Vegas, and they very generously put me up in the Four Seasons. And the Four Seasons happens to have a coffee bar in the lobby in that hotel. And so one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee. And the barista working that day was a kid named Noah. Noah was funny and charming and engaging. And I stood there for far too long buying a cup of coffee because I just enjoyed talking to Noah. So, as is my nature, I asked Noah, "Do you like your job?" And without skipping a beat, Noah said, "I love my job." Now, in my line of work, that's significant. Like is rational. I like the people, I like the challenge, I get paid well, I like my job. Love is emotional. It's a higher order connection. For example, if I ask you, "Do you love your wife?" and you say, "I like her a lot," right? I know there's a difference, right? And Noah said, "I love my job." In other words, he told me he's got a higher order connection, emotional connection to his work. So I immediately followed up and I said, "Tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would even say to me, 'I love my job.'" And again, without skipping a beat, he said, "Throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me if I'm okay, ask me if there's anything that they can do to help me." He said, "Not just my manager, any manager." And then he said, "I also work at another hotel. And there, the managers catch us doing things wrong. There, the managers are only concerned about what our performance is." He says, "There, I keep my head below the radar, just want to get through the day and collect my paycheck." He said, "Only at the Four Seasons do I feel I can be myself." Now think about that for a second. This is the exact same human being, and yet our experience of him in one hotel versus the other will be profoundly different, not because of him, but because of the leadership environment in which he works. The one with good leadership, he'll be amazing, like I experienced, and the one with bad leadership, he'll be terrible. We always think it's the people, but very often it's the leadership environment. And so we all know what it feels like to be on a trusting team. We all have been there. It's when you can raise your hand and say, "I made a mistake," or "I'm having trouble at home and it's affecting my work," or "You've given me a job and I don't feel trained or qualified for it, I need more training," or "I don't know what I'm doing." And we say these things with the confidence that our leader or our colleagues will rush in to support us with no fear of humiliation or retribution. That's what it means to be on a trusting team. Unfortunately, we also all know what it means not to be on a trusting team, where we would never admit mistakes or say we don't know or say we need help for fear that it'll hurt our ability to be promoted, or it will be humiliated by somebody in public, or somehow jeopardize our careers. And so we keep it to ourselves. And eventually, things break. It's only the organizations where we can talk about the truth in a supported environment that thrive over time. That's a trusting team, and that's one of the primary responsibilities of a good leader, is to build an environment in which a trusting team can happen.
I hope that resonated.
And Jason, if you could drop the link to that YouTube video, there were some people that were unable to hear that, and we're sorry about that, but we will provide that link.
Perfect. I would definitely do that. Thanks for that call out. And for those that were unable to, for those that were unable to hear, just a one-liner synopsis is: in order to build a trusting team or a trusting environment, we have to be able to create a space for people to trust. That starts with us as leaders, as well as the organization collectively. One thing that I want to add to that video that I thought was just so spot on is, as we think about building trust within our direct reports and our peers, I also want to just take a moment and challenge all of us. We might be sitting in a space as leaders and we're saying, well, I don't trust my leader. That could be our reality. And the same way I'm giving you tips to lead a team, I also want you to take those same tips and figure out, how can I build trust with my leader if I don't have it? So please note these tips as far as building empathy, focusing on results and consistency. Those tips and tricks are helpful for leading a team. It's helpful for managing family, but it's also helpful for when you're looking up at your leadership team and you don't trust. How can you be a contributor to building that trust? So I want to go to this next slide where we talk about, and when we take it all home, where we talk about the speed of trust. And now this is where it gets really exciting. We talked about that trust account. We talked about the withdrawals and the deposits. But when we think about it from a team perspective, as most of us are individuals that work together on a team, how does this trust really show up in allowing us to perform and be a better group collectively? When trust is down, meaning that when that trust account is decreasing in funds, when that trust account is maybe in the red, when there's been withdrawals and overdrafts in that trust account and it's declining, that also means that the speed in which you perform is also declining. And that means, when I'm speaking collectively of your team, and that also means that the costs to do things are highly increasing. That's a trust tax. I want to use turnover for an example. Turnover is it's a popular thing now that we're seeing, especially as different generations are merging together in the workforce. Turnover is a hot topic. When you have turnover due to a lack of trust, you have a decrease in speed, meaning that you have an empty seat. You have to bring somebody on. You have to ramp them up to speed. You have to give them all the legacy information for them to perform. Speed does decrease. Costs increase. We all know the cost of recruiting is extremely expensive. That's a trust tax. I think when we think about trust, I want you to think about those top performers on your team, the ones where you're like, if I lose them, I lose sleep. We all have them. It's not favoritism, it's just a top performer. When trust starts to drop with those individuals, replacing them is very challenging. It impacts the team's speed and it impacts the team's and organization's financial costs. That's a trust tax. Our goal is to not have trust tax, but more so have trust dividends. That's where we win. That is where trust is high. Speed is even higher because we're moving fast, because we're moving collectively. We're moving with congruency. We're moving with alignment. We're moving with consistency. We're moving with curiosity. We're moving in a way that drives results collectively. We're doing that and our cost is dropping. We have people that have been on our team for 5, 10, 15 years. And better yet, a better example for trust dividends is I think of strong partnerships. You know, when you call your best friend outside of work, you call him or her, and when you all get on the call, y'all get right to it. Let me tell you what's going on. Let me tell you what's on my mind. Let me tell you, y'all just shoot straight from the hip. And then when you get on the call with someone that you don't have as strong of a partnership with, well, it takes a little while for the speed to pick up in the conversation. You spend about the first 10 minutes doing the politically correct, how is everything? How is mom? Even though you really do care, you really want to get to the stuff that really is on your heart, but it takes a little bit of time because the trust isn't there. So when we think of working together in strong partnerships, if I can walk into a room with 5 of my colleagues and we know we all trust, that 60-minute meeting can be a 30-minute meeting and we can get twice as much done. That's when we think of the speed of trust. It costs us money when we work without trust. It costs us money as an organization, as a team, as a department, and even as a leader. It costs us money and it costs us time when we don't have trust. So the biggest takeaway here, when we think of the speed of trust, the cost of trust, and being a leader that is fueled by trust, my question to each of you, and I want you to, whether you have a sticky note next to you, whether you're on your phone, I want you to go to your notes, take that sticky note out, get that pen out, And I want you to write down, what can you start doing today that will help you strengthen trust within your professional relationships? I gave you 3 or 4. We had some that came in the chat earlier on. You pick the one that's most connected to you in your current working environment, in your current situation, and write down, what is the one thing, not 2, not 3, because we have a million things happening in life. We're going to focus on just one. What is the one thing you can do today that will help you strengthen trust within your relationships? And I want to give us 30 seconds to think of that and write that down before we wrap. And for those that wish, feel free to throw it in the chat. I think sharing knowledge is powerful, also drives a little bit of accountability there. But if you're comfortable, feel free to throw what you're going to do in the chat. I would love to see. And as you all are doing that, I want you to hold on to what you're going to do. Hold yourself accountable. Know that everything you need, everything that you have to have is already inside of you. It's nothing that we talked about today that you don't already have inside of you. It's a matter of just focusing, being intentional, and surfacing it to your day-to-day behaviors to maximize not only your leadership capabilities and your leadership potential, but also everyone that you come in contact with. And with that being said, I want to say thank you all so much. I want to pass it back over to our host, Brianna Jones.
Thank you so much for this today, Jason. These were some wonderful tips and skills that we discussed that's important for leadership. Just to recap, we talked about the 3 practices for building trust, and that's empathy, which will go beyond acting like you care. So remember, there's empathy, consistency, and then pairing results with trust. As leaders, we must create that safe space to have others feel trusted and a sense of belonging in the workplace. But as a leader, that's our responsibility. And I know that some of this was off topic, but I really want to point out what Jason said about, the people being above you or below you, not displaying those good characters of leadership, but you only being responsible for yourself and your actions. So these were all great tips. Jason, I did have one question that came into the chat to me directly. So if you don't mind, I would love for you to answer it. You addressed it a little bit, but the question is, how do I identify any policies or habits that are eroding the trust in my team and that I need to change?
Yeah, that's a great question and whoever submitted that, thank you for that. It's really challenging. And the reason why is a lot of times, depending on the type of organization that you work in, we find ourselves dealing with policy that's been around for 10, 15, 20 years before we even got there. And those legacy policies are almost feel like they're stuck in stone. And you're probably wondering, well, what can I do to be aware of those? I think there's 2 things that come to mind for me. The first thing is you have to be willing to inspect. Inspection is essential. When we think of policy, when we think of teams that maybe we've been working with for 10 or 15 years, we get in the habit of seeing things as they always been. I think there's an opportunity to inspect, to say, hey, I want to look at this policy from a lens of, does it support a trusted organization? And maybe you're like, for me, it does. Let me pressure test you with some other peers, some individual contributors, some leaders. But I think it is going in with the lens of, I'm inspecting to discover, is this trust add to our culture, to our business, to our line of work? I think the second thing, when you think of the team, is it's being able to share with the team what your goal is. And this goes back to that level of open communication. I've seen this happen before where we'll say, this training was so powerful. Now I want to go be better with trusting. But your team, your department, they're like, what are you doing? What is going on? Why is she acting like this? Why is he acting like this? It's bringing people along the journey so they can help you inspect as well. What do I mean by that? Hey team, in our next team meeting, I want to use the first 10 minutes just to tell you something I learned about trust that really resonated with me. I want to share with you also, you all can know how I'm thinking about how I want to grow the team. What are your thoughts? And then you ask the team, are there any policies or any ways of working or any work streams that we have that aren't centered around building a trusted culture or a trusted team or a trusted policy? And I guarantee you, maybe not in that moment, you won't get immediate answers, but people will circle back and say, you know what, actually, boss, I think we do need to relook at this because this has been bothering me for a while. I just thought it was the way it was. And so don't feel obligated to challenge alone, challenge collectively. Bring people along the journey with you to challenge policy, to challenge culture, and to challenge organizational dynamics. That would be my thoughts behind that.
Thank you, Jason. Challenge collectively. I think that really does sum up what we've learned about trust. It is a partnership, and it is something that you have to do as a collective. So thank you again, Jason, for today's topic, leading at the speed of trust. And we will make the recording of this presentation available on our YouTube and Facebook page within 48 hours of today. If you want the presentation and the recording link to be emailed to you so that you can share with your team to start the discussion, then please enter your email address in the chat. Our next disruptive leadership webinar will be doing less. So, Jason alluded to it a bit earlier. We are in a high speed pace lifestyle at work, and we're having to do more with less staff. So make sure you tune in next month for that topic, doing less, and that's going to be led by our executive director Shayna Young, who is also the AVP of Leadership Development here at Columbus State University. So that will be on September the 21st. Feel free to reach out to the Leadership Institute on all social media platforms using @CSU Leadership. Please let us know what you want to hear next within this series, and we look forward to being in touch with you all soon. Ms. Atkins, I will get you in touch with Jason after we wrap up for today. But again, thank you for your time, and we will see you all at the next Disruptive Leadership Series webinar. Bye-bye.